Alright, students, over the last couple of days we've been talking about chromosomes and DNA and the structure of DNA and genetics a little bit. Today we're going to focus on traits. We'll go through this presentation and I'll give you a brief description of some traits, and then you'll complete the genetic trait survey and kind of see what traits you have as in regards to this presentation. So a trait can be defined as something that's passed down from generation or from parent to offspring. And it has to do with the genes and what genes you have and which genes are dominant and which genes are recessive. Now, most traits are genetic, but some traits can also be in fact influenced by the environment. And we'll talk about a few of those as we get deeper into it. But the main purpose of this presentation is just to introduce you to traits and to probably see what traits you might have. Alright, so human traits. I'm going to talk about a couple of them, and one trait is something that we call Darwin's air point. So some people have them and some people don't. Just depends on what genes are passed down to you from your parents. So in this picture, this person does not have it. If you look at this picture closely, you'll see it's a smooth or a non-pointed inner ear, or outer edge of the ear actually. And if you look at this picture over here, you'll see that point, what we call Darwin's point. So either you have this trait or you don't have this trait. It's not that something's wrong with you, it's just either you have it or you don't have it. So this trait is called ear points or Darwin's point. Another trait is tongue rolling. So some people can do it if they have the genes for it, so they can roll their tongues, and some people cannot. It's another trait that's genetically passed from parent to offspring. Playing a sport. Now, while there might be some genetic relation to this trait is definitely influenced by the environment. So you can learn to play a sport. It's not necessarily a genetic trait. It's not 100% through the genes, because some people's parents are great athletes and they just are not. So it's something that is environmentally influenced. Attached earlobes. So if you look at this picture, you can either have attached earlobes or detached earlobes. This person in this picture right here has attached, and this is a diagram of detached earlobes. So when you do the survey, you'll get to see if you have attached earlobes or detached earlobes based on what genes were passed on through you from your parents or your grandparents. Playing an instrument, this is another one that's influenced by the environment or something that you can learn to do, and it's not 100% passed through the genes. Hitchhiker's thumb. So this person does not have hitchhiker's thumb. If you have hitchhiker's thumb, it's going to be this part of the finger is going to be bent probably back here. So it has more of a curved look to it. This has more of a straight look to it. So this person does not have hitchhiker's thumb. Hitchhiker's thumb is something that's genetically um, passed on from parent to offspring and not so much influenced by the environment. Upturned nose is something that's another genetic trait. So this person has an upturned nose in this picture right here, and this gentleman does not have an upturned nose. So you'll be able to see if you have an upturned nose or not. Left-handed, being left-handed is something that's genetically passed on. It's a recessive trait, but it's a trait that's passed on genetically. Freckles. So freckles is an interesting trait because it's definitely genetically passed on, but the environment also does have a big effect on freckles. So you'll notice here it says freckles can fade with age. Also, people who have a lot of exposure to the sun can also, it enhances their freckles. So you can see more of their freckles, or they might even gain more freckles depending on exposure to sunlight. Bent pinkies. So this is an interesting one if you put your hands together side by side so that your pinkies are trying to touch. If you have bent pinkies like this person has, you'll see almost after the first digit they start to bend away from each other. So some people have it where their pinkies bend away from each other, and some people have it where these pinkies line up and they touch each other all the way to the tip. We're not talking about the fingernails, but we're talking about the tip of the finger. So you'll be able to check and see if you have bent pinkies or not. Curly hair is another genetic trait. Either your hair is curly or it's straight, might be wavy, but highly curly hair is a genetic trait that's passed from parent to offspring. Short big toes. So when you look at this, and you can check this one when you get home, If your second toe is longer than your big toe, we call this a short big toe. And this is something that's genetically passed on from parent to offspring. Blue eyes is a recessive trait that's genetically passed on. Not too many people have blue eyes, but it's a recessive trait that's passed on genetically from parent to offspring. And straight hairline or widow's peak. So it's a picture of President Obama. He has a straight hairline. If we look at John Travolta, he has more, it's more of a V-shaped hairline, and that's what we call a widow's peak. So if you have a V-shaped hairline to the front, that's what we call a widow's peak. The best way to look at this is to kind of pull your hair back a little bit and look at what type of hairline you have. Either it's straight or you have that peak. It looks almost like a bird beak a little bit, I guess. Good way to describe it. Also, chin dimples or a cleft chin. If you look at this picture of John Travolta again, he has a chin dimple, or what we call a cleft chin. And that's another genetic trait that's passed on from parent to offspring. This is an interesting one. Clasping your hand, and which this has nothing to do with being left-handed or right-handed. But if you clasp your hand, which one feels more comfortable? Does it feel more comfortable to have your left hand or your left thumb over your right thumb, or your right thumb over your left thumb? So if you clasp your hands together, which one naturally feels more comfortable? Having your left thumb over your right thumb, or having your right thumb over your left thumb? And you'll see it has nothing to do with being left-handed or right-handed. It's just which one's more comfortable, and this is a genetic trait that's passed on from parent to offspring. Here on your fingers, and we're looking at the hair above the knuckle. So some people have hair below the knuckle. That's not what we're looking at, but we're checking for hairs above the knuckle area. That's a genetic trait that's passed on from parent to offspring. Another interesting one is your ring finger if it's longer than your index finger. So what you need to do is place your hand flat against a desk and look at it and see if your ring finger is longer than your index finger. So in some people, the ring finger would be longer than the index finger, and in others, they'll be about the same length. So look at it closely, look at both hands, and see if your ring finger is longer than your index finger. Typically, more boys have a longer ring finger than their index finger. And you can compare in the class and see who has, if you have more boys having longer ring fingers than index fingers, or girls. Liking broccoli. So this is not necessarily a genetic trait. This is something that's definitely influenced by the environment, as your food preferences can change throughout time. But this is, something that's more of a preference as opposed to a trait. And this is just something to show you differences between traits and preferences and things that are influenced by the environment. This is another interesting one. So if you fold your arms across your chest, does your right arm go over your left arm, or does your left arm go over your right arm? And which one feels more comfortable to you? This is another genetic trait that's passed from parent to offspring, and it has nothing to do with, again, being right-handed or left-handed. It's just with which one feels more comfortable, right arm over left or left arm over right. Hair whorl, this is an interesting one. It's typically harder to see in girls just because of the length of your hair, but when you look at someone from the top, does their hair curl in a clockwise position like this over here, or does it curl in a counterclockwise position? And again, this really doesn't have anything to do with how you brush your hair. This is a genetic trait that's passed from parent to offspring, whether your hair curls counterclockwise or clockwise. Being nearsighted, that's another genetic trait passed on from parent to offspring. Nearsighted is if you can only see things that are close to your face, and that's what being nearsighted is. Gap between your front teeth. So this is an interesting one. Genetic trait, definitely passed from parent to offspring, having this gap in the front teeth, but it's something that we alter based on environmental factors, because a lot of us get braces and fix this gap between the front teeth. So this is something you might want to think about before you had braces. Did you have a gap between your front teeth? Yes or no? And try to answer that question and see if it's something that you have or that has been genetically passed on to you. And then this is another one that we'll do at some point. It's called a PTC taster. It's a chemical in a strip of paper, and it's either when you taste it, sometimes you taste it. So those of you that have the trait, you'll taste the chemical, and those of you that don't, you won't taste the chemical at all. And if you do taste the chemical, you'll know because it tastes very bitter. But if you don't have the trait, you're not going to taste anything at all. So these are some genetic traits that are passed from parent to offspring. Go ahead and fill out the survey with regards to yourself, either yes or no, if you have the trait or not. And then when you get home, find two relatives. It can be mom, dad, grandma, brother, aunt, uncle, sister, cousin. Just find two relatives and check them out and see what traits they have and fill it out for your relatives as well. When you're finished filling out the ones for yourself, though, you get the class numbers and see what traits the class shared. So how many people had tongue rolling, how many people were left-handed, how many people had freckles, so on and so forth. All right. And as we get more into genetics, we'll talk a lot more about traits and genes and how they're passed on from parent to offspring. Enjoy the survey.